Hi, the SI meteorologist Paul Dorian here. Well, we are rapidly approaching the month of May, and it's time to take a look at the 2012 tropical outlook, as well as the summer possibilities for the Mid-Atlantic region. Last summer, of course, was quite hot here in the Mid-Atlantic, and we had an active tropical season. We even had some storms that affected the U.S., such as Hurricane Irene during the month of August. Several factors play a role in what I believe will happen over the next several months, anywhere from the Pacific Ocean to what's going on over the Atlantic Ocean, and we'll take a look at this over the next few minutes. For example, right now over the Pacific Ocean we have a weak La Nina, where the water temperatures are a little bit colder than normal in the tropical part of the Pacific. However, that has been transitioning over the last several weeks to more or less neutral conditions, and I believe it'll actually transition into a weak El Nina by the middle part of the summer. El Nino meaning warmer than normal temperatures in the tropical part of the Pacific. Meanwhile, there are some colder than normal waters off the West African coast as well as in the middle part of the Atlantic. That could play a role in inhibiting the number of tropical storms, especially during the first half of the upcoming tropical season. However, over the Gulf of Mexico, and the Gulf of Mexico itself is warmer than normal right now, and just off the East Coast, especially the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast Coast, water temperatures are actually above normal. That may increase the activity for the U.S. during the latter part of the tropical season when we get more homegrown storms to develop in places like the Gulf of Mexico. There are some analog years I'd like to take a look at to give us an idea of what kind of temperatures and precipitation we may have over the summer here in the Mid-Atlantic region. Namely, these 5 particular years have had La Ninas transition into El Ninos, along with the positive phase of the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, which we have right now. So that can give us some clues as to what to expect over the summer by looking at some similar years in the past. For the highlights of the tropical outlook, well, first of all, I believe it'll be a rather normal year, maybe even a little bit lower than normal in terms of the number of named tropical storms, and we'll get into the reasons why over the next few minutes. That puts us in the ballpark of something like 10 or 11 named tropical storms, with 5 to 7 perhaps reaching hurricane status, and of those hurricanes, perhaps 2 or 3 reaching major hurricane status, that is Category 3 or higher. Again, the first half of the tropical season tends to be dominated by waves coming off the African coast, moving all the way across the Atlantic, either then affecting the U.S. or turning away before they reach the U.S. East Coast. And because of the colder than normal waters off the African coast and in parts of the Atlantic, this may actually be not too active in the first half of the tropical season from, let's say, June to about mid-August. However, the second half of the season is when the U.S. may have to be on guard because of some homegrown storms that tend to develop in the latter part of the tropical season. And given the fact that the Gulf of Mexico waters are quite warm, we could have a fairly active second half of the tropical season, let's say the latter part of August into September and October. Meanwhile, for the Mid-Atlantic, all in all, some of the anomalies that I looked at from these analog years tend to give us the belief that we'll have a normal summer, maybe even a tad cooler than normal, despite the fact that we had some very warm weather in March and even some hot weather here in April. I do believe we'll have a rather normal, maybe even a tad cooler than normal in the June to September time frame here in the Mid-Atlantic region, with a little bit higher than normal precipitation amounts. Well, let's first take a look at the sea surface temperature anomalies across the Pacific Ocean as well as the Atlantic Ocean. First of all, here off the South American coast, we have some warmer than normal waters right now. This is the weakening of the La Nina and what I believe will develop into a weak El Nino over the summer months. That tends to play a role in the Atlantic tropical season. In fact, there have been some studies that show when an El Nino develops in the Pacific Ocean, the tropical part of the Pacific, sometimes you get stronger than normal winds in the tropical Atlantic, which tends to reduce the number of hurricanes. Also, we have these colder than normal waters here developing right now off the western African coast, indicated here by these blues. And you see out here in the middle part of the Atlantic or closer to the U.S., there's also some colder than normal waters. This, of course, is the breeding ground area for tropical systems in the Atlantic Basin off the West African coast, and the fact that there are some colder than normal waters right now could play a pivotal role in reducing the number of tropical storms. And again, the combination of a developing weak El Nino in the Pacific and some colder than normal sea surface temperatures in the tropical Atlantic is leading me to believe that we'll have a relatively normal or even a tad below normal in terms of number of tropical systems. But notice here the above normal water temperatures here over the Gulf of Mexico and just off the East Coast. That could lead to more of an active time frame for the U.S. in the second half of the tropical season, let's say the latter part of August and September and October, because that's usually when we get more homegrown storms, such as those that develop in the Gulf of Mexico and affect the U.S. So perhaps a slow start to the tropical season, but then kind of an active finish in the latter part of August, September, and October. Well, one of the keys to the upcoming summer forecast is what's going on in the Pacific Ocean. And here we have a whole series of computer forecast models to try to predict what will occur over the next several months in the Pacific Ocean. Right now we have this rolling 3-month average here of March, April, and May. We're right around in this region here, and anything below this particular line here is considered La Nina conditions by all these computer forecast models, and we in fact have a weak La Nina right now. But notice over the next few months, almost all of these models transition the La Nina towards neutral conditions, and then by the summertime, maybe even a weak El Nino, and this is what I expect to happen. So this plays an important role in the overall forecast, not only for the summer outlook here in the mid-Atlantic region, but also for the tropical Atlantic region as well. So again, a weak La Nina transitioning towards neutral over the next couple of months, but by the middle of the summer, and here is the June, July, August time frame, most of these computer forecast models tend to have weak El Nino, and again, that tends to inhibit the number of tropical storms in the tropical Atlantic, and that is one of the reasons why I believe it'll be a rather normal, perhaps a tad below normal type of tropical season. Well, one of the ways to get a clue as to what might happen over the next several months is to take a look back at some years that I think have quite a few similarities to this particular season. And these are the 5 years that I call the analog years that I'm using to try to give a picture of what might happen here over the upcoming summer. Well, this is a temperature anomaly chart based on those 5 analog years. And all the light blues or greens here represent cooler than normal. Notice here in the Mid-Atlantic region, quite a bit of a light blue showing up here in terms of a tad below normal in terms of temperature, and this is in the June to September time frame. So if you believe these analog years, you tend to believe that we'll have not at all like summer like we had last summer in 2011 where it was very hot, but rather normal to perhaps a tad below normal in terms of temperatures. How do those analog years do in terms of precipitation? Well, this is the precipitation anomaly chart for those particular 5 analog years. Here the light blues and light greens represent above normal precipitation. So again, in the Mid-Atlantic region here, we're seeing a lot of light blues, which in this case indicates slightly above normal precipitation. So judging by these analog years, it looks like a normal to slightly cooler than normal year in the Mid-Atlantic in terms of temperatures, and perhaps slightly above normal for precipitation. Well, let's go back to our first chart to summarize again for the 2012 tropical outlook based on the factors that we talked about over the last few minutes, namely a weak La Nina developing into a weak El Nino and some colder than normal Atlantic water temperatures. I expect that the first half of the tropical season will be rather slow and inactive in terms of the effect on the U.S. However, the second half of the season can be a little bit more active for the U.S. based on the warmer than normal temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico and just off the East Coast. The second half of the season from late August through September and October is usually when we get the homegrown storms, so that could be the time frame that the U.S. should stay on guard. Meanwhile, for the Mid-Atlantic, the analog year suggests it actually may be a normal to slightly cooler than normal from the June to September time frame with a little bit more precipitation than normal. Well, that's it for now for the SIweather.com. This has been the 2012 Tropical Outlook from the SI Meteorologist.